the good old hockey game is the best game you can name. And the best game you can name is the good old hockey game.
You Don't Know Sports is back with a brand new podcast for you, the fan, here on September 16th, 2024. I am your host, SlimmDa KID, and as the theme song suggests, this week's You Don't Know Sports podcast is all about hockey. Pro hockey, college hockey, amateur hockey. This episode is presented by Spreaker.com, YouTube, and me, your host, SlimmDa KID. So without any further hesitation, let's jump right into these amazing hockey stories for you, the fan, to enjoy. Kagi Ken Doherty. A quick glance at Ken Doherty's career stats will show you nothing remarkable from the journeyman winger. He only scored 15 goals in his NHL career, but 3 of them will keep Kagi Ken in the hockey record books forever. Before there was a sudden death overtime in the NHL, teams would play a full 10-minute overtime period at the conclusion of a regulation tie. Doherty and his Toronto Maple Leafs found themselves in this situation in 1934 against the Ottawa Senators. Tied 4-4 heading into the overtime session, Doherty channeled his inner sniper, scoring the only hat trick in NHL overtime history, leading the Leafs to a 7-4 victory. With the changes in the overtime rules, Doherty will remain in the NHL record books forever. Brendan Shanahan and Rick Vivey. NHL disciplinarian Brendan Shanahan told a funny story several years ago on a radio show about when he was a younger player. Shanahan was a huge fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs growing up. He was skating at a rink in the summer of 1983 in Toronto and heard that Rick Vivey had been skating at an adjoining rink and was in the next locker room over. Shanahan wandered into the locker room and asked the Toronto captain for an autograph. He described the response from Vivey as less than accommodating. Shanahan would get drafted and went straight to the NHL 4 years later with the New Jersey Devils. He never forgot about his encounter with the Toronto Maple Leafs captain. During a game against Buffalo, Shanahan lined up next to Vivey and attacked him when the puck was dropped. After the scrap, 2 linesmen had to drag the rookie winger to the penalty box. Vivey, dumbfounded by the malice in the confrontation, found out from Shanahan's teammate, Jim Korn, that the rookie Pugliest happened to be a disgruntled autograph seeker from 4 years prior. 1907 Montreal Wanderers. The Montreal Wanderers were originally an amateur Canadian hockey team that played in several leagues before joining the NHL in 1917. Prior to 1926, the Stanley Cup was competed for by teams outside of the NHL. As each league folded, the NHL gained exclusive rights to compete for the trophy. In 1907, the Stanley Cup was won by the Wanderers as they defeated the Kenora Thistles. Prior to 1912, in the Challenge era, teams could challenge one another for the Stanley Cup at any time, depending on rink conditions. In 1912, it was decided that the Stanley Cup would be competed for only once a year at the end of the season. At some point during the 1907 season, the Wanderers were being photographed with their prized Stanley Cup. Unfortunately, they left the trophy at the photographer's house. The silver chalice was later found being used as a flower pot, housing geraniums for the photographer's mother. Prestigious. Kris Knuckles Nyland. One of the biggest characters in NHL history is Kris Nyland. Most of his career was spent with the Montreal Canadiens before finishing his career with the New York Rangers and Boston Bruins. He earned the nickname Knuckles for his strong desire to throw them at opponents' faces. Nyland makes this list for 3 reasons. Reason one is the massive amount of penalty minutes accumulated in his career, a grand total of 3,043. The second is Nyland's unique place in the NHL record books. In a 1991 game while playing in Boston, Nyland collected 10 separate penalties, 6 minors, 2 majors, 1 misconduct, and 1 game misconduct for a grand total of 42 penalty minutes. The most awesome fact about Kris Nyland is that he purchased the old penalty box from the Montreal Forum when they were auctioning off pieces of the historical barn. Possibly the coolest addition to any man cave ever. The New York Rangers Stanley Cup curse. Everyone knows the big story about how Mark Messier ended the New York Rangers' 54-year Stanley Cup drought. Does anyone know the story about why it became a curse? Other than that the blue shirt futility on Broadway, there appears to have been some supernatural concoctions along the way that give much more quote-unquote valid reasons behind the championship void. The 1940 New York Rangers were already in a celebratory mood. The mortgage on the Rangers' home, Madison Square Garden, was paid off that year, so they decided upon winning the championship they would burn the documents in the cup. Though it has been speculated that the burning documents were extinguished with the urine of Ranger players, particularly Lynn Patrick, that story cannot be confirmed. Another notable theory is that Red Dutton of the rival New York Americans declared that the Rangers would never win the cup as long as he was alive. Dutton's declaration held true until his passing in 1987, and then a few years extra were added on. Sylvian baptism. I can't be too sure if this is one of the best family planning schemes ever, or if things just happen to work out this particular way. When Colorado won their first Stanley Cup in 1996, Sylvain Lefebvre decided to have his baby daughter, Alexandre, baptized in the fabled cup. The idea was borrowed by rival Red Wing Thomas Holmstrom, who used his day with the 2008 Stanley Cup to have his cousin's daughter baptized while in Sweden. Phil Bubba Bourque. The long-standing tradition of having your name engraved into the fabled hockey trophy is one of the coolest perks of winning the trophy itself. Seeing your name on the trophy along with names of some of the all-time greats has been one of the coolest things for any hockey player in the world. Phil Bourque got his Stanley Cup in 1991 as a member of the Pittsburgh Penguins. The second most famous, arguably Bourque, in the NHL noticed that the cup was rattling during his day with the trophy during the summer and took it apart. He found that a couple of repairmen had inscribed their own names on the inside of the cup and decided that he wanted to do the same. Bourque carved his own message for future Curious Cup winners. Enjoy it. Phil Bubba Bourque, 91, Penguins. Classic. The Kris Draper trade. We all know Kris Draper as the center of Detroit's famous grind line, along with Darren McCarty, Kirk Maltby, and sometimes Joe Kocur. Draper wasn't drafted by the Red Wings, but he almost came to Hockeytown at an equally affordable price. Draper played in only 20 games with the Winnipeg Jets in his first 4 seasons. With limited opportunities to crack the Winnipeg lineup, he was traded to Detroit in 1993 for $1. The $1 man went on to play 1,137 games for Detroit, winning 4 Stanley Cups and a Selke Award in 2004 as the league's top defensive forward. Not sure if it was an American dollar or Canadian. McCarty says it was Canadian, but that's a steal either way. A bizarre Russian love triangle. Straight out of your favorite daytime soap dramas came a Russian love triangle that Hollywood couldn't script. Sergei Fedorov and Pavel Bure were some of the first wave of Russians to break into the NHL and were regarded during their prime as two of the best players in the world. Fedorov ended up in Detroit with the Red Wings, while Bure became the Russian Rocket out in Vancouver with the Canucks. The timetable is pretty sketchy to say the least, but it's believed that former tennis prodigy Anna Kournikova was being courted by Fedorov as early as when she was 15 years old. She would attend his games, and he popped up at tennis matches around the globe during the off-season. The problem was, Kournikova was also taking calls from another Russian superstar hockey player. At one time, both Bure and Fedorov claimed to be engaged to the gorgeous tennis diva, but only Fedorov managed to put a ring on it. His ill-fated marriage was short-lived, but the bizarre and spicy triangle was a global extravaganza for all paparazzi. All of the Russian love drama took a back seat to the international flavor of the Brazilian-Russian combo. Kournikova ditched the sports scene completely, falling under the spell of a certain mole-toting Latin crooner. Glenn Hall. Cal Ripken is universally regarded as the Iron Man in sports for his consecutive game streak. While showing up for work every day is something that most of us schmoes do every day with much less fanfare, the rigors of professional sports take more of a toll on us than sitting in a cubicle for 8 hours a day. Cal may have had some competition when you consider the consecutive game streak of Glenn Hall. Though he is possibly the most viewed goalie in his history of hockey, only NHL purists recognize him in the picture. Hall is probably remembered as much for his pre-game ritual as he is for his consecutive game streak. Before every game, Hall would vomit and then drink a glass of orange juice. Amazingly, the acid content in his gullet allowed him to play in 502 consecutive games and 49 playoff games, a record that will never be broken by an NHL goalie. His consistency was rivaled only by his excellent play in goal. Nicknamed Mr. Goalie, Hall would win 3 Vezina trophies and 2 Stanley Cups while playing for the Detroit Red Wings, Chicago Blackhawks, and St. Louis Blues. That is the end of this You Don't Know Sports episode. I have been happy to bring you these hockey stories. I, once again, am your host, SlimmDa KID, and I hope you have enjoyed this brand new You Don't Know Sports podcast all about hockey. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new You Don't Know Sports podcast. And be sure to tune in tomorrow, September 17th, for a brand new Round 2 Wrestling, your number one news source for everything professional wrestling.
Hockey game is the best game you can name, and the best game you can name is the good old hockey game.